Okay, so this week's Parsha is Parsha Lecha, and I wanted us to explore together one of Abraham's nisyonot, one of his tests. So we famously talk about Abraham's 10 trials or his 10 tests, but it's not at all clear how to count and what counts. Oops, that happens to me all the time when I forget to switch screens. And so I wanted to look at one possibility of what the first test is, and to think a little bit about our own journeys through life as well. So I can see some of you, but not all of you when I share my screen. So please just feel free to jump in. Participation of all kinds is welcome. So as I was preparing for this year, I thought of this first quote. So it's not really in context, but I sort of titled my shir around it. And I will admit it has been a long time. Oh, gosh, sorry, let's see. It seems like someone else is also from the office signing in, but it seems like that will be fine. Okay, I think it doesn't matter, hopefully. Sorry. So I have not read the Lord of the Rings series in quite a long time, but my father, Zichrono Livracha, used to read The Hobbit and the Lord of the Rings out loud to me when I went to bed. So I have a fondness in my heart for them. And as I was thinking about Abraham and Lech Lecha and wandering and walking, I thought of this idea from a poem or a riddle that's in the Lord of the Rings, and that is that not all who wander are lost. And again, it's been a long time since I read them. So if we have any like Buckies in the room, please feel free to jump in. But my understanding is that the point is that wandering in and of itself, like the act of walking from place to place, does not mean that you are lost, as long as you have some kind of goal in mind. And what is interesting to me about that, this phrase, is that it's been, I would say, sort of appropriated by a group of people who travel or who sort of don't follow the traditional path in life, from high school to college to some kind of professional path. And sometimes they don't have a goal in mind, right? So they're using this to justify their wandering, when I think that perhaps Tolkien meant it more to say, as long as you have a goal in mind, wandering could be quite useful. So I think that we'll hear sort of that echoed throughout this year, but maybe something to hold on to is like the act of wandering and also the act of intentional direction. And maybe those could be the same, and we don't always think that they are. Okay, so the Midrash Hagadol, one of our collections of Midrashim, says that the first trial was tiltul, which is this act of going, of journeying somewhere, and that this was the hardest of all. I don't know if anyone else finds that like a little bit shocking, but I will admit that I did at first. I think that we commonly understand the Akedat Yitzchak to be one of the nisyonot, one of the trials. And so to say that the act of tiltul is harder than the act of being asked to sacrifice your son was surprising to me, that was the perspective of the Midrash. So I thought, oh, that's really interesting. Like maybe there's more to this Lech Lecha piece, right? I think maybe I always felt Lech Lecha was like a one-time command, right? Leave your house and go to somewhere else. And this idea that maybe there was like more of a process behind that was intriguing to me. So I want to look at two pieces from Breshit Rabbah. They actually fall right next to each other, but we're going to look at the second part first. Does someone want to read in Hebrew or in English?
Everyone's sharing.
Vayomer Hashem el Avram. Rabbi Berachia.
What English you want? Should read tomorrow.
What?
Should read it in English.
Oh, either way, it doesn't. You can read in Hebrew first. That's fine.
Oh, okay. No, I'll be glad to read the English. God said to Abram, Genesis 12:1, Rabbi Berachia opened. Your perfumes have good fragrance. Your name is poured out oil. Song of Songs 1:3. Rabbi Berachia said, to what was Abraham our father similar? To a flask of balsam tree juice closed with a tight lid, placed in a corner, and its fragrance was not emitted. When it was moved, its fragrance was emitted. Thus the Holy Blessed One said to Abraham, our father, move yourself from place to place, and your name will become great in the world.
Thank you, Tamar. And thank you, Anna, for offering to read in Hebrew as well.
I really didn't. I'd rather read in English. I'm
Oh,
sorry.
all right, so that's okay. You can read the next one if you'd prefer.
Okay, fine.
So this is a story or an imagining of a midrash, right? That Abraham was like a jar of perfume that was with a tight lid that was placed in a corner. So on the one hand, that's like a sort of sad image, maybe, I don't know what people think, right? That sort of left to collect dust in the corner, not being used to its fullest extent. And it only emits its fragrance when it was moved. And so Abraham is sort of stuck in the corner in this like backwater city, wherever he is, and he's not getting to see the people. And so God says you have to move so that your perfume, your words of Torah, your knowledge, your spreading God's name will come out of you. At the same time, I think there's something again, sort of difficult about the midrash, right? Abraham is resting comfortably in his corner, right? He has all of his perfume inside. He hasn't been like shaken loose yet. And then all of a sudden, it's like, I imagine like my 3 or 4 year old, running through the house, like waving a jar of water and things are sloshing everywhere. And, it's like very messy and sort of uncomfortable. And so I think that the Midrash is imagining the first, that like Abraham was like locked up and he got freed to move his perfume, to move his fragrance or his Torah around the world. But certainly there's something a little bit jostling, maybe is the word that came to mind about this idea. Any thoughts, or is this like a midrash that resonates or doesn't resonate? Thinking about Abraham as a jar of perfume is also sort of like a funny maybe analogy.
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask. Like, why do you think they chose a jar of perfume as an analogy?
I think that idea of like the smell like permeating is maybe a good one, right? Like a bowl of chicken soup or but I don't know. I think it's also a good question. It doesn't it feels maybe like unusual to use both smell and also perfume for a man. I don't know if at that time it was like more common for, like, if that was a more masculine image than we associate today. I'm thinking of like my mom's like old fashioned spritzer bottle. That does not feel masculine. Yeah, also a smell versus a sight or a sound, right? He could have been a trumpet stuck in the corner. I think there's something that feels like almost not intentional about a smell. Right, to play a trumpet or to wave your flag, those sort of feel like actions. Here, Abraham is very passive, right? He is the jar of perfume that's just getting jostled, and when it gets jostled, it happens to let out a smell. But it's not like he's like the perfume guy at the mall, spritzing like on a piece of paper for you. It doesn't feel as intentional, maybe. I don't know. It's a good question.
Like people would notice him.
You're saying
like that not that he's going out waving his arms and calling attention to himself, but that just by moving around that people, I think the use of the fragrance is just that people suddenly notice him. Like he's not necessarily calling attention to himself.
Yeah, I like that.
When I think of a smell, I think of like that time that Yitzchak said to Yaakov that he smelled the reach nichoach, and it was like the sense of smell is that I thought it was like the first sense that's developed when we're in utero, and
yeah, I've read that too.
It's like because of that, it's considered very holy, because it's like it's connected to the oldest part of your brain or something like that. But I think of like a smell as something that's like a spiritual thing that he like represented, like the smell of Gan Eden or something.
Beautiful. I love that. I love smells. If you ask my family when we come into town, I'm always like asking my family to smell things outside. Oh, it smells like spring. It smells like summer, right? I think you're right that it's a very primitive in like the best way. Part of our body is our sense of smell. I love that, like a holy sense. And the smell of Gan Eden, that's beautiful. Yeah, or the smell of God. I don't know. There's something almost like evocative about it. Of some other thing, right? It makes, there's something enticing, like what does God smell like, right? What would the words of Torah smell like? I think sight we might understand, hearing, if he was like yelling, we would understand that he was saying the words, but smell it's also a little bit subjective, maybe, right? Like what I think smells good, my kids say smells like dirt, right? And I'm like, no, it smells like baseball. So it's a good point. I love that. Thank you, Joey.
Thank you.
Okay, so moving back one. So this is the midrash that I taught last year. I was telling Jerry and Tamar. I think they might have been the only ones who are here. So hopefully it won't be repetitive for them either, because I actually want to look at a different piece of the midrash, but it's a fantastic story. So the story here is that we might have some more guests. I think email just went out. The story here is that Rabbi Yitzchak is wondering what Abraham like what his experience was. And so he tells a story. He says that this may be compared to a man who is traveling from place to place when he saw a castle aglow. Sort of unclear exactly what that is. A bira achat doleket, a castle or a big palace like on fire is probably what it means. And he said, is it possible that this castle lacks a person to look after it? Right? Abraham is noticing this like big fire in a building and there's no one running with a bucket of water calling the fire department. And he says, like, what's going on? Who's in charge here? And the owner of the building looks at him and says, I am the master of the castle. And it's sort of a disturbing or sort of like a jarring answer, right? Because he's not saying, I already called the fire department, or right, like, I can't put out the fire. I'm just going to collect my insurance money, whatever the thing is, right? Just, I am the master of the castle. And so what happens with Abraham is similar. So what the Midrash is imagining, right, is why Abraham? Why is Abraham chosen to be the one that God says Lecha to? And the answer is because Abraham is the first person to notice the castle on fire. And that could mean sort of the negatives, right? Abraham is the first to be attuned to the people who are hungry or who are suffering in the world. And more importantly, maybe, Abraham is the first one to link that to some kind of owner, some kind of divine being. Last year, I spoke about how maybe a castle aglow could be like one that has lights on in every room. And there's more of like the wonder of Abraham saying like, wow, look at the flowers and the countryside, but not stopping there, but saying, oh, this must be sort of divinely driven, these creations. So either way, no matter how you look at it, a castle on fire or a castle sort of alight, Abraham is the first person to ask who looks after the universe. And the Holy Blessed One, right, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, looked out at him, right, Heitzitz alav, he gazes at Abraham, and God says to Abraham, I am the master of the universe, acknowledging, connecting with Abraham. And what I think is interesting here is that the Hasidic commentaries really are focused on the movement piece, that Abraham is wandering in the countryside. There's actually a third midrash, which I didn't bring, about a man who happens upon a castle, but there's nothing about the traveling from place to place. That seems very important to the Hasidic commentaries in general, right? That here he says, "Hu over mimakom lamakom." There's something sort of transitory about Abraham here. So the Mei HaShiloach, the Ishbitzer Rav, says, Al ze amar lo Hashem yitbarach, lech lecha. And what he means when God says lech lecha is hainu la'atzmecha, moving towards yourself. right, which is sort of a radical read, which makes sense for someone like the Ishbitzer, right? Lech Lecha is not like go there from your place, from your home, from your father's home, right, from your family. It's Lech Lecha, to yourself. Find your true source, right? Kol divrei Hashem lo yikra b'shem chayim v'ikar hachayim timtza bach. That your sort of like essential truth, maybe, the main point of life, you shall find in yourself. And so it's almost like God is saying, Abraham, I'm picking you, but to be truly effective in the world, you need to really do some like self work, some introspection. You need to find out what's driving you. You need to be able to perform, right? You need to be able to speak to lots of people, to have your tent open from all sides. All of this will take having like a really firm grasp on who you are inside.
And God is saying that who he is inside is that smell, like that holy smell.
Yeah, I think so, right? Because as I said, like I put them out of order to focus on the reach first. Yeah, I think that's certainly possible, right? So Rabbi Yitzchak is imagining that God is talking to him, right, as a traveler. And so what does it mean? It's a different Rabbi Brachia, so maybe they're not really connected, but maybe they go together to say, what does it mean to go to yourself? It means to find your inner reach and to shake it loose, right? And to go around so that your smell will sort of inhabit all of the world. And I think that the Mei HaShiloach, like I had to read it like 15 times to even feel like I sort of had a grasp on what that meant, like to move towards yourself. I think Rabbi Sachs speaks in a more modern language, but had a very similar idea. Does someone want to read just this little paragraph from Rabbi Sachs, Inner Directedness?
I can read it.
Oh, thank
This
you.
life-changing idea of inner directedness, the courage to be different, began with the words Lech Lecha, which could be translated as go to yourself. This means follow the inner voice as did those who came before you, continuing their journey by bringing timeless values to a rapidly changing world.
Beautiful, thank you. Right, so go to yourself. And so here I think, right, here's the first, maybe the first part of the Nisayon is this sort of jostling of oneself so that you can spread your perfume. And I think this is like the next concrete one, right? What is hard about the test of Lech Lecha? Besides sort of the pshat level of leaving what's like familiar to you, it's that you have to have this inner directedness. And I think that is hard, right? Sort of figuring out your inner voice and being able to follow it is really hard. And so if we are to be like Abraham, right, to follow in Abraham's footsteps, Lech Lecha doesn't mean necessarily leaving the comfort of our community, but it could mean the idea of really like Lech Lecha, going into oneself and following our inner voice, right? And Rabbi Sachs assumes that when you do that, you will bring these timeless values, and maybe that's the smell, right, that Abraham was spreading, was these timeless values to the world. So I think that's sort of one option. The Mei HaShiloach, maybe interpreted a little bit by Rabbi Sachs, is that there's like some hard inner work that one has to do to be on this journey of Tiltul, and that is part of the test that Abraham faces. The Sfat Emet, and here translated by Art Green, I didn't bring the Hebrew here, also looks at the idea of the walking, of the wanderer in the Breshit Rabbah story, saying that the human being is called a walker, always having to go from one rung to another. For habit makes things seem natural, and this sense of nature hides the inner light. This is true even of the Torah and the commandments. When we do them out of habit, they become our nature and we forget their inward meaning. Therefore, we always need to seek out some new counsel, right? And so I think that here we see why the perfume has to be moved in order to spread. right? It's not enough to get a really good mister and sit in the corner, because things will become sort of habitual. And when they become habitual, we forget that special smell that comes out of them. It loses its pungency. And so Lech Lecha me'artzecha means a person should always keep walking. Asher areka, right? That which I will show you is always to some new attainment. So this is why the person is called a walker. Whoever stands still is not renewed, for nature holds him fast. Right? And I love this dynamic between angels and people walking. It comes up a lot through Tanakh, that angels above are beyond nature, right? So they stand, right? When we do the Kedusha, and we sort of bounce on our toes for Kadosh, 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 that's sort of emulating the angels who stand still. But a person's job is always to keep walking, right? And there's a lot of beautiful Torah sort of thinking about movement as human nature. Halacha, right? Our body of Jewish law comes from the verb halach, to walk. So maybe that we always need to push ourselves to understand, and right in our rapidly changing world, to continue to evolve with our timeless values in hand. And so here, right? So for the Mei HaShiloach, it's like an internal wandering, right? The jostling comes from within. And the Sfat Emet is saying, no, don't forget, you just have to always keep moving. And this might be a more physical thing, right? You can't learn in the same class, for too many years, or maybe, the same job or the same whatever, the same path while you're walking your dog, right? Whatever the thing is, changing things up, like it gives you a fresh impression. It gives you a closer connection maybe with God, because, right, we find the inner light, the sort of true nature of Torah and commandments by moving. And our green adds this beautiful little piece here. So I put it down here as well. Saying, thank you, Lord, for all that nervous energy. Life as an angel might have been easier, standing still to do your bidding, but it is our walking, our ever climbing and sometimes falling from rung to rung that makes us human. Despite all the struggle and pain that go along with growing, we wouldn't have it any other way. So I don't know if any of you have seen, for those of you on Facebook, there's a video of like a piece of performance art. I tried to find it, but of course, when I want it, I can't find it. Otherwise, it's there all the time, of a man climbing up stairs and falling off the stairs onto like this big trampoline, and then sort of bouncing back onto the stairs. And so he would like go up 2 stairs and then fall down, and then go up 3 more and then fall all the way to the bottom, or like, fall on stair 2 and jump up to stair 8. And it took him this very long time to get to the top. And then when he gets to the top, as he takes his bow, he falls all the way back down onto the trampoline and down to a lower level, right? And I sort of thought of that when it was right, to our ever climbing and sometimes falling, that I think maybe part of the nisayon, part of that struggle of always having to walk is losing your footing, and knowing that you're putting yourself in that position in which you will always be potentially losing your footing, right? As soon as you learn the path, you should start a new path. And so the branches or the roots or the stones are always there to trip you up as you go. And so Lech Lecha takes on this, like, really, I think, big test-like image, right? It's asking Abraham to never really be comfortable. I think maybe when I first thought about Lech Lecha as the command, right, it's like you're uncomfortable when you move, but then you get comfortable. But really, Abraham is being asked not to move just to Israel, but to move constantly within Israel, to be spreading his message and his perfume, to be always revealing some new inner light. Right, like I think what the Sfat Emet says in another place in this essay is that, right, we get the benefit of the tzaddik. We don't have to be walking all the time, but they will reveal that inner light to us. But someone has always got to be doing it in order to find the inner light. And so to be asked to do that all the time, to really never put down roots in one place, but to always be moving, and to know that if you're not moving, you're not doing your job, is actually, I think, a very hard thing, right? I couldn't imagine doing that. I don't know. Do we have any travelers in the room? Any consultants or legal experts who travel for court cases? Or
married to somebody who used to travel until the pandemic.
It's hard, right? I think,
Yeah. Very hard, especially when the kids were young. It was very hard
yeah.
because he traveled internationally. So he'd be gone for 2 weeks at a time sometimes.
Wow. So, I mean, he truly was following in the footsteps of Abraham, right? Like he probably never knew what time it was.
Yeah.
You know, a constantly different schedule, different places, different bed every night, right? You know, it's hard on you, Rena, and definitely on the kids too, I'm sure. My cousin used to do that before the pandemic also. So I saw with his wife and his kids. But I think it's hard for them too, right? You come back in a different kind of exhaustion than if you, I think, were to just commute, you know, a few miles each day.
Yeah, it's very true. And actually, yes, talk about exhaustion. So one of our kids was in Israel when the pandemic started, and her program shut down. But they did a very typical Israeli thing and said, well, we don't know how we're getting them home, but it's almost Shabbat, so we'll figure it out after Shabbat. And everyone here was freaking out because honestly, most of the airlines had stopped flying to Israel already because Israel was shut down already.
Yeah.
And so I talked to a couple other moms here in Chicago, and they were like, no, I'm booking a flight. But our daughter was only 15 at the time. And so she was very young. And
Yeah.
we were having trouble getting her connecting flights that were, we couldn't get her on a flight that came directly to the US. And basically the only reason we were able to get anything was because of my husband's status with the airline. And we couldn't get a connecting flight without an overnight stay in London. And I didn't want to leave her by herself in London, you know,
As a 15-year-old,
because she was 15. He literally got on a plane. This is at the very beginning. This was March 13th, 2020, I think, March 14th. I don't know. Like
wow.
right at the beginning, whatever the date was. He literally got on a plane and flew to London to meet her in London, spent the night with her in London, and then flew home with her. Just so that she wouldn't have to stay by herself, because we knew that everything was about to get shut down in London. And sure enough, while he was waiting for her in London, they announced that they were going to shut everything down coming from London too.
Wow. How
So
scary.
yes. So talk about travelers and not knowing where you are and what's going on.
Yeah, and it's stressful, right? It's a big strain. And so on the one hand, knowing that it's worth it, right? It was worth it for your husband to see your daughter's face, right? Relax, I'm sure, when
Right.
he saw her. To know that for Abraham, he's actually spreading this beautiful truth throughout the world. But on the other hand, it puts a big strain. And I don't know if this resonates for people, but for me, it gives me a compassion for Abraham. Sometimes I feel like Abraham makes choices that I might not make or have made. And I wonder, right, like, how could Abraham Avinu have done this thing? And to think about the incredible strain that Abraham is under as a wanderer gives me a little bit of compassion for understanding why, you know, sometimes things don't go the way I would expect. I also thinking about the smell piece, right? And how we were talking about how maybe it's like a little unintentional. And I think also it's a little bit subtle, right? Like I could imagine if you're journeying all the time, always walking, right? Always meeting new people, and always you have your like elevator pitch, right? I'm Abraham. I'm here to tell you about God, right? However you want to think about what Abraham said. Sometimes a smell is like all Abraham has to do is sort of walk through the place, right? Maybe he doesn't have to stop and do his elevator pitch, but simply by seeing something different, right? It sort of shakes you out of your habit to see someone wander through, someone you don't know, wander through shul, wander through, I think often like in a snowstorm or when someone gets stuck in a place because they're traveling and they end up staying in a community for Shabbat for like many years after, the community talks about that person. Remember that guy who was going from, wherever further west of Chicago, over to Boston. He stops in Chicago for that Shabbat. I wonder what happened to him, right? And so there's sort of like a part of us that wakes up just from someone else walking through, right? And that's like part of what the Sfat Emet is talking about. Okay, so to tie it all together, right? I think there are sort of three different ways of thinking about the walking. One is that jostling perfume bottle. One is thinking about having this inner direction, going into your own self, really looking hard at yourself. And the third is this idea of really walking to create something, keep things fresh and keep things new. Aviva Zorenberg wrote a beautiful chapter in her book, The Beginnings of Desire, about Lecha, and she talks about lots of different parts of Lecha, but she has one section on this idea, and she writes there this, I think this beautiful, she's a beautiful writer, there emerges a sense of the journey itself, the travail as essential to the birth and growth of self. Tiltul, the not always graceful lurching of uncertainty, releases the perfume. It also teeters on the verge of madness. Look at that old man traveling about the country like a madman. And ultimately, that is the finest compliment that is paid to Abraham. Right, that there's something about the lurching, the not always graceful lurching of uncertainty that is part of Abraham's job. And I think to feel that way all the time must be very tiring. And so then to think about Tiltul as one of the Nisyonot, and maybe as the biggest Nisayon, makes a little bit more sense. And to sort of tie it back into the Tolkien line, I think it makes a lot of sense, right? Because there's this sort of uncertainty when you see someone lurching through your neighborhood, and you wonder what's going on, and you think like, that's weird, he must be lost, right? But he's only not lost if there's some sort of purpose, right? So Abraham's purpose, it seems like, is actually to wander. And that's a hard balance to play in a world in which wandering indicates a lostness to oneself. And so Abraham is always sort of, right, it's like, is that guy, crazy or a visionary? And by being someone who journeys, he is someone who you might never be really entirely certain. And also to think about the journey as essential to the birth and growth of self, I think is really powerful. To remember that we're all on journeys, right? And all of the things that we do along the way contribute to our own birth or rebirth and growth of ourselves. She is speaking there, I think, to the name change, right? And for some people, things are obvious like that, like a change in name. If you get married or you change your name, you start going by your Hebrew name or your English name. But for some people, it's much more subtle than that. But that we have to remember to be patient with ourselves and to know that we, hopefully our perfume is one that is beautiful, and that we leave that sort of smell lingering as we move through our life and through our journey. And that it should be a comfortable yet uncomfortable journey in which we renew ourselves and our connection to God and to ourselves, and work on ourselves, always knowing that although it is difficult, like it was for Abraham, that it's a nisayon that's sort of worth taking, maybe is how I thought about it. I'm going to stop the share so I can see more faces. If anyone wants to share anything else, I'm love to have discussion.
I missed the definition of tiltul. What is it?
Oh, I'm sorry. It's to journey, to move.
Thank you.
Yeah, sure. Sorry, I should have put that in there. Right. And so when the Midrash Hagadol, the first source, says that the first trial was tiltul, that's sort of like the journeying, the Lech Lecha, right? So that very first command from God. And we're not really sure what the 10 trials are, but the Midrash Hagadol is imagining that very first command of Lech Lecha me'artzecha, like leave your land and your moladetcha and your Beit Avicha, your culture and your family, that is the first trial, the leaving. And that perhaps the sort of what makes it so difficult is it's not just the leaving, but it's sort of the wandering nature of the leaving, that Abraham will never really have like a place to call home again. He's like a traveling salesman of sorts, selling God's wares throughout the world.
But how is that Abraham going to himself? Like, how is that making him himself?
Yeah, it's a great question, right? So I think if you read the Mei HaShiloach and the Sfat Emet together, the wandering forces a person to constantly like reevaluate and not to become sort of settled in their ways. And I think that sort of ties in nicely to the idea of self-introspection, right? That it's easy to sort of get comfortable with who you are. But if you constantly are really looking inside of yourself, sort of a metaphorical journey or, internal journey as opposed to a physical journey, then you'll constantly be refreshing yourself. Right? If you think about tefillah, if you sort of say, well, I'm a person who davens quickly and goes home, or I'm a person who really loves mincha but not shacharit, or, whatever the thing is, I really like to daven outside, not in shul, or in shul, not outside, you'll sort of get settled in that track and you won't really explore your relationship with God, right? But if you really force yourself to think, well, I used to be this way, but now I'm that way, or maybe I should push myself to be more of one way or another, that going inside yourself is sort of that act of sort of forcing yourself to wander internally. Does that make sense, maybe?
I think I need to think about that. I think it does make sense, but I need to think about it.
I think it takes a long time. As I said, like, I think the Mei HaShiloach is dense. And so you have to read it like several times, even just to really like, what does it really mean to go into yourself, right? Self-directedness is one way of thinking about it.
Introspection.
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 And so how is introspection a journey, Anna? Does that like make sense to you?
Well, yes, because you want to figure out what's important to you and where you want to go in your life.
Mm-hmm.
There's a concept in the yeshiva that they call it steig, which means to try to move forward. They I don't know if you've ever heard of that, but and they're trying to move forward in their learning. They're trying to improve, and it's the same thing. It's you're not happy with where you're at. You're trying to always get better and do better. I compare it to this a little.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know.
I like that. Yeah, I didn't know that's what steig meant. I thought it meant to learn. That's nice. I like that. Right, or even to be it's to the charedim, right, means to rock or to shake, right, to tremble. Like a movement though of some sort. Never sort of being firmly on one's feet, perhaps is like the way to think about it.
Or never happy, not content to be in the same place, always trying to move ahead or move forward or move in a different direction. That's the way I look at it. I could be wrong.
No, I like that. I think it makes sense.
Yeah, it makes sense. It makes a lot of sense. Yeah.
One of the things I could reshare, but maybe I won't, is one of the things I had bolded was that that Hitzitz Alav HaKadosh Baruch Hu, that God looked at him. And the Sfat Emet talks about how the gaze of God was like the gaze of like a mirror, right? And for a lot of people, it's very uncomfortable to look into oneself, right? Like you don't want to see what's there or what's not there, right? And so I think that maybe is like part of seeing what's new, turning things over, right? It would be easier to say, well, I know I'm someone who likes this or that or whatever, and not have to re-examine it at any point. And so that, sort of part of that rocking or moving forward is saying like, maybe things have changed. Maybe I've changed, right? Maybe I can do things differently. And I think like the perfume there really fits for me because it's this idea of like jostling, you're shaking your insides up a little bit, and that if you don't do that, you can't really, you don't have a clear message or a clear smell, right? Like things are sort of muddled. But the jostling helps this like very pure scent come out into the world in a way that unjostled perfume doesn't, right?
Yeah. I like how you said that that Lech Lecha means that he had to go to go to himself. And like as a leader, I think it makes sense. Like he was like the first leader of the Jewish people that like he had to like become one with himself. And then you said that when you gaze at God, it's like gazing in a mirror, because when you're like really getting close to like the part of you that's truly yourself, like that's probably the part that is the godliness part of you, like the Tselem Elohim within you. So Avram had to find that godly aspect in order to be the leader. And my question is that the reason for Lech Lecha, or is that the reason? Did God give him the test of Lech Lecha so that he could become like find himself and like as a leader and like, you know, like the father of like all these nations, or like the Jewish nation? Or was it the reason for all of the 10 tests as well?
Mm.
And did God require Yitzchak and Yaakov to also find themselves too?
Hmm. These are excellent questions, right? I think your question about whether one test sort of encompasses other tests or they sort of have one theme is an excellent question, and many pages have been written about it, and many different opinions. So there's something sort of appealing to the idea of the first test setting the tone for all the rest, right? And so I like that. I think that's really nice, to say that all of the tests sort of will always come back to Lech Lecha in some way, because Lech Lecha is the test of, you know, knowing yourself, finding the divine spark within you so that you may share it out. That's beautiful. I don't know, you know, I think it's a good question about Yitzchak. Yitzchak is such a complicated, quiet character. It's hard to know. It's hard to know exactly how Yitzchak functions, you know, in relation to God. Maybe it is by virtue of being first. I don't know. Certainly open to other ideas, but that, you know, maybe Abraham really had to do that because there were no even role models to doing that.
That's right.
Yeah.
And maybe Yitzchak had a role model in his father, I don't know, or maybe Yaakov, and even just thinking about his grandfather, right, was able to think about it in a different way. But for, I mean, and that's part of this seeing the castle on fire, right, is that Abraham, according to the Midrash, is really the first person to think about the world in a divine lens, to realize that there's something else behind the world, whether it's the good parts or the bad parts, it doesn't really matter. You know, according to the Midrash, everyone else in Abraham's time just thought things happened because they happened. And Abraham saw this sort of divine nature. Wonderful. Well, I don't know if I left us with a lot of clarity, but I hope I left us with some nice things to think about over the week and over Shabbat as you look at the Parsha. And probably, I'm not entirely sure what we'll do next week, but we'll continue to think about Abraham on some level. And so thinking about, you know, as you said, Joey, right? Like if this is sort of the mindset in which Abraham is charged to go out into the world, how do we think about all of his other pieces? You know, I think one of the interesting things that comes up is Abraham's journeys into Egypt. Right. And if you think about Abraham as this jar of perfume, you know, maybe going to Egypt is not just because of the famine in Canaan, but is because Abraham was supposed to, in some way, send his perfume out into the world beyond just Eretz Canaan. You know, we have to think about Lot and that encounter, right? Abraham has a lot of like interesting encounters. And if we think about them through that Lech Lecha lens, maybe it changes the way we think about them entirely. I don't know. But certainly a complicated character with a really strong introduction when thinking about his journey and his wanderings.
Are you going to do the Parsha next week also? Like you're going to, Is this?
Yes, that's the plan, is to do Tuesdays at 8 o'clock, to
Uh-huh.
do, half an hour, 45 minutes on the Parsha. Right, we ran a little bit late because of the link trouble today. But to do probably something sort of different every time. I don't think like we'll do Midrash every time from this angle. Maybe we'll do some more contemporary or more Chassidut or less Chassidut, but to do something related to the Parsha each week.
Okay.
If people have requests, happy to think about them. So next week is Vayera, and I'm not sure exactly what we'll do then. Hi, Sarah will probably.
Email?
Do I have, sorry?
Do you have an email that we? Like
Oh,
if-
my email at the shul is rabbanityael@svaj.org.
Okay,
And I'll put it in the chat.
okay, good.
Could you repeat that, please?
Yes, it's rabbanityael@svaj.org. I just put it into the chat as well.
Okay.
I welcome all correspondence. I love getting email. As it's a new email, I don't get so many yet. You're welcome to reach out for all things. Oh, and I meant to put in the chat to push my Cheshvan agenda while I was here. We have a really wonderful Cheshvan gratitude group on WhatsApp. So if anyone is not in it yet and would like to be, I am going to put the link in the chat as well. And if anyone ever wants to meet with me, my door is always open, so to speak. And I'm always happy to get to know people better. Let me put that here. It's a really fun chat, very inspiring. People just share sort of a daily gratitude. Alexander, who was here, but I think left, is in it. And he always shares nice things. I think Rena, you're in it too, right? Is that? I recommend it. Yeah, so let me know what you thought. And
I tried to, this is Anna, I tried to go on the link and I couldn't get anywhere with it. So I must be doing something wrong because it didn't
You
work.
have to have WhatsApp.
I
you have
do.
WhatsApp?
Yeah, I do have a WhatsApp. Yeah.
oh, if you want to send me your WhatsApp phone number or whatever, I can just invite you directly if you'd like.
Oh, okay. So my WhatsApp phone number is my cell number. Is that probably what it is?
Yeah.
I think so.
I'm really not I'm technologically challenged. So this is.
I am too often technologically challenged. Well, if you want to send me your phone number or tell me now, I'm happy to add you manually as well.
Okay, great.
Okay.
Rabbani, yeah, I just wanted to say thank you so much. I thought that was I really enjoyed that shir, and I really like that Avram was told to like go towards himself as the first leader of the Jewish people.
Right.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Wonderful. Well, I think this is a good place to end. If you have any questions or concerns, directions you want this to go, I'm happy to adjust. And I look forward to seeing you all soon. Have a wonderful week.
Thank
Thanks
you.
for all your
Thank you.
participation.
Bye.
Thank you. Have a good trip.
Thank you.
Right.